And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the social network is about to get a lot less social. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg says he thinks the future is a more private platform. Plus, Huawei's day in court. The date is set for Huawei CFO extradition case. We will look at how the legal battle between the Chinese telecom giant and the U.S. and Canada is heating up. And grabbing the lead, ride-hailer Grab wants its super app to be the leader in Southeast Asia, and it just got $1.5 billion to try to make it happen. First to our top story, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who has spent his career pushing for more open communication, says the future is going to be more private. In a blog post Wednesday, Zuckerberg declared that the company's future product development will be focused on encrypted and ephemeral communication as more users want to interact privately. He wrote, quote, "I believe the future of communication will increasingly shift to private, encrypted services where people can be confident about what they say to each other to stay secure, and that their message and content won't stick around forever. This is the future I hope we will bring about." This amid heightened scrutiny of Facebook's data collection practices, which are being probed by several governments around the world. Joining us to discuss, Activate CEO Michael Wolff and Bloomberg Sarah Friar. Now, of course, Facebook doesn't necessarily have the best track record of keeping anything private, Sarah. So what do you make of this very distinct change in strategy?
Well, I think, to your point, that it's a little bit about increasing that trust with users around privacy. But in my opinion, a lot of it is actually about the fundamental problems that are facing Facebook today, which is the public scrutiny and government scrutiny over privacy, and also the problem with content moderation. If it's encrypted, Facebook can't even see what people are saying, and therefore doesn't have to fix it. Of course, Zuckerberg framed all of this as something that users want. He said users really want more private communication. It's the fastest growing aspect of our business. We are doing this because of their demand. But it's worth noting how it will affect their perception problem.
Michael, can we trust Facebook to make Facebook more private?
Zuckerberg talks about going from the digital town hall to the digital living room. And the challenge is, I'm not sure people do trust Facebook. He's saying this because he recognizes there's this trust challenge. But in reality, what they're doing is they're talking about protecting the privacy of people in a broader conversation, but not necessarily their privacy versus Facebook, because Facebook is ultimately in the advertising business.
Right, you're still going to be giving all your information to Facebook.
Right, not only is it going to be in the platform, and the battleground's going to be around messaging. So if you look at Facebook controls between Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram, they control the majority of the messaging around the world. But that doesn't mean people who are worried about their privacy aren't going to go to other platforms like iMessage or some of the emerging platforms like Telegram and Signal. And let's not forget WeChat, which will dominate other parts. It doesn't have to stay in China. So some of the things he's doing are merely defensive, and users are going to be very skeptical about it.
So, Sarah, tell us a little bit more about what he said. He said services would be opt-in, that, if you want your messages to disappear, maybe they will be able to disappear. We don't know what this all means, but how do you think this is actually going to look or feel different for a user?
Well, think about the position that Facebook's in. They're being scrutinized by governments around the world who say that they don't give users enough choice. And Zuckerberg has always thought that, if we give people choice, they probably would pick an advertising-supported network. They probably would pick to post publicly. So a lot of this maybe won't be as big of an impact on Facebook as we think. That said, he was very deliberate about explaining that everyone's been using Instagram stories and WhatsApp status, these parts of the service that only last for 24 hours. And he wants to bring that kind of disappearing nature to more of Facebook's content. So it becomes less of a permanent record of your life and more of a rotating version of you. So things can disappear maybe in 3 months, maybe in 3 years. You can decide.
Michael, you've done a ton of research on digital advertising. How do you think changes like this, no matter how they are put into practice, will affect Facebook's business?
Facebook, a lot of what the platform allows is enables an advertiser to target very finely, to find specific groups of people and to find, in some ways, their interests. And so it's not likely to affect Facebook's advertising business. In fact, it could enhance them. The broader challenge is Facebook is going to merge from being a broadcast platform, which is where a lot of the problems were. A lot of the misinformation, the foreign data operations took place in that broadcast surrounding. And saying it's going to be more private, a lot of users are going to wonder to see what happens. Ironically, Facebook began as a private platform. It was something for university students to talk to each other. And in order to become a commercial enterprise, it had to open up even more. So we have to expect this is going to be engineered and designed in a way that it will only enhance Facebook's advertising business versus impair it.
Sarah, there was a new development today in terms of some of the government scrutiny. Facebook won a freeze on some of the disclosures in a Washington, D.C. privacy lawsuit. The D.C. Attorney General, Karl Racine, has been suing the company, claiming that it failed to protect consumer data. This is tied to Cambridge Analytica. What does this mean?
Well, Facebook has had a lot of big document leaks lately, either from governments or from news reports. This is maybe a small victory in a bigger picture here. The company is going to face regulators, lawmakers, attorneys general, and this is the year that it's going to happen. And so they need to be proactive about coming up with solutions before the government comes up with solutions for them. And so I think that's how that ties into the news you hear today, where Facebook is coming out and saying, we're going to give our users more choice. We've heard them. We're listening to them. But like Michael said, I think that that's still going to be ultimately in service to their advertising business.
Michael, what is your outlook on not just Facebook, but Instagram and WhatsApp, and whether users are going to keep coming back? Are they just so large, users really don't have a choice when it comes to other products? Or will these privacy issues ultimately be the downfall?
Already, engagement on Instagram far surpasses that on Facebook. And so there's a whole group of people who just keep coming back every day to Instagram. And to some extent, since they're younger, they're less focused on privacy, and the content that's shared on Instagram doesn't have the same level of depth as it does on Facebook. So they're going to be less vulnerable. Facebook itself, we should expect that a lot of people are going to continue to be skeptical about it and may share less. And then you look at WhatsApp and Messenger, and there's really no barrier to entry. Somebody can come in with a new service, your content isn't on it, it immediately scrapes your context, and so you can get up and running on another service. So that's where Facebook may be the most vulnerable. We may see a real wave of social splinter as a result of that.
Interesting, social splintering. I like that. I'm going to use that. Activate CEO Michael Wolf, always good to have you here and good to see you in the studio. And Sarah Fryer, I'll see you back on the West Coast. All right, the CEOs of Apple, Lockheed Martin, and Walmart are among 25 prominent Americans joining the Trump administration's American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. The board, announced by Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and Ivanka Trump Wednesday, will help shape the administration's efforts to develop job training programs that meet the changing demands of U.S. employees. The board will work to develop a national campaign to promote education and training and better identify companies' hiring needs. There you see Tim Cook with President Trump. Coming up, massive funding rounds dominated venture capital in 2018, but could a macroeconomic slowdown dent this year's funding? We will discuss. And if you like Bloomberg News, you can check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. '18 was a historic year for venture capital. According to PitchBook and the National Venture Capital Association, venture capital firms spent roughly $131 billion across more than 8,000 deals last year. That's more than a 57% increase from the year prior, but will that trend continue this year? Joining us to discuss, First Mark Capital Managing Director Beth Ferreira. Beth, great to have you back here on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So how will 2019 compare to 2018?
So, at the end of last year, we saw, the yield curve inversion and some sort of concern about slowdown. But, into the first quarter of this year, we haven't seen that slowdown. Deals are just as competed as they were last year. Funding rounds are as big, if not bigger. More deals being preempted. So,
what do you mean by preempted?
So before they go out to market, someone will come in and give them a term sheet or do the deal.
If you take SoftBank out of the equation, is it still as robust?
That is a good question. I think so. I mean, there's more and more funds being raised. They're bigger and bigger. And so while SoftBank has invested big dollars in 2018, I think the sort of bulk of the funds increases over the last year or so will make up for that.
Are you at all concerned about the political uncertainty tied to the economic uncertainty given the election cycle and what's going on with China?
So in the private markets, and particularly venture capital and early stage venture capital, while we keep an eye on that, we don't necessarily see those trends for 6, 12, 18 months after they hit sort of the public markets.
So let's talk about the public markets. We've got Lyft on track to go out potentially, in a couple of weeks. Uber, Slack, Pinterest, first marks in Pinterest. I know you can't talk about Pinterest specifically, but what's your outlook on deals this year?
So it's going to be a big year. I mean, it's shaping up to be a big year in 2019 for IPOs. I mean, what makes me most excited as an early stage investor is we generally see after a wave of IPOs a lot of innovation. So the people who are building and scaling those businesses coming out and thinking of new businesses and starting those businesses. So I think we'll continue to see a bunch of innovation 6 to 12 months out.
Now, you have an interesting background because you worked at Fab. You were the COO of Fab. Obviously, you're investors in Pinterest. You worked at Etsy early on, so you sort of have seen the best and worst of competing with Amazon and other sort of retail giants. What do you expect to happen in the e-commerce landscape over the next year? Because it seems like we're seeing a rise of these niche players who can compete against Amazon, but you wonder for how long.
Yeah. So, when we're looking for companies, we're looking for those companies that are capturing the hearts and minds of their consumer. So something that's differentiated, something that, Amazon is not quite doing right now. But we are seeing a trend to investors having a closer eye on profitability and sustainability. And so
are they though? Because Lyft is losing half as much money as it's making.
Well, that's not e-commerce, right? So, but especially in the e-commerce space and where, scaling, there feels like there's sort of capped on the scaling pieces of some of those companies. There's a little bit more of a scrutiny on that.
Now, 8,000 VC deals last year. 2% of VC funding went to women-led companies last year. So of those 8,000 deals, I mean,
very few.
It's just a fraction.
Yeah.
Do you think that'll change in 2019, or is it going to take a lot longer?
I hope so. I think that it might take a lot longer.
What are you doing in your firm to try to make sure you are seeing more women entrepreneurs and surfacing, all of these people who may have been overlooked?
Yep. So, well, one, we are spending more time sourcing, and also having someone like me, which looks like some of those female entrepreneurs, helps that pipeline as well. So, and in the last year, we've increased the number of female founders that we've backed.
All right. So, just quick 30 seconds. What are the hot trends in 2019? Where are you going to be putting your money?
So, I spend a lot of time on the consumer space, but I'm also spending a lot of time on sort of the back-end businesses. So think supply chain, customer service, future of work. How do we get these companies up and running and continuing to scale? And as we think about that profitability piece, making them more efficient.
All right. Beth Ferreira, Managing Director for Smart Capital. Thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, Southeast Asian ride-hailing giant Grab has secured new funding from SoftBank. How the company will use the investment to take on its rivals. That's next. This is Bloomberg. This art has been created by artificial intelligence. This art. The question is, will collectors want it? Sotheby's will find out at a sale in London next month. 4 months ago, Christie's said it had sold the first piece of art created by AI, but a human was involved in that case. According to Sotheby's, this new artwork it's selling was totally created by a computer. Well, Southeast Asia's leading ride-hailer Grab has announced it has raised $4.5 billion in new financing. This includes a near $1.5 billion investment from SoftBank's Vision Fund. Grab's president Ming Ma told Bloomberg's Hassan Amin and Rishad Salamat what they plan to do with the new funds.
We are very excited to have closed $4.5 billion in new funding. This is a new record, the largest private financing of its kind in Southeast Asia. And we continue to see tremendous investor support and interest in joining our round.
You've already raised more than $7 billion. Why do you need the additional funding?
If you step back and look at the Southeast Asia region, it is an incredibly dynamic market where the consumer class is rapidly digitizing. And within this digitization, we see tremendous opportunities to continue growing our super app platform across every single market that we operate in. If you look at our go-to-market strategy last year, our revenues more than doubled to over $1.1 billion through 2018. Our food delivery business is now the only regional platform for food. Present in 6 different countries. Revenues in food have grown 45x in 2018. And our payments business is now the only regional platform with access to e-money licenses across all 6 major countries with the most vibrant opportunities to use our payment solutions compared to any other company. So as we think about this financing, we will be investing a bulk of the capital into continuing to develop our super app services, particularly in food delivery and our platform in Indonesia.
In Indonesia in particular, where competition is really stiff at this point in time, can this be a game changer for you in Indonesia?
Sure. First of all, Indonesia is one of our strongest and our fastest growing markets. In ride sharing, we have well over 60 to 70% market share. Our food delivery business in Indonesia has grown more than 10x in volumes. And our payment solution is now part of the most vibrant ecosystem in partnership with Tokopedia and OVO. So we see tremendous opportunities to continue growing, not just in Indonesia, but really across the entire region.
So with the latest funding, what is the valuation of Grab?
We don't disclose valuation, of course, but what I will say is we've been very pleased with the valuation that investors have given to us in this round, number one. And number two, I think we've been very pleased with the universal support that we've seen from investors around the world.
Ming, thank you so much for joining us. It's Rish in Hong Kong. How much does this money go towards your trajectory and firming up your trajectory for profitability? In other words, when will you start making money?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'll say that we are already profitable in some of our most mature business segments and in our more mature markets. And in the markets where we are not yet profitable, we have a very clear line of sight to getting there. What I'll mention is what makes us very distinct from some of the other global ride-sharing companies is the platform of services that we offer, and the ways that we're able to engage with our customers is much broader than purely ride-sharing or food delivery alone. So I think ultimately, longer term, the economics on our platform will be significantly better, we believe, than ride-sharing companies around the world.
So tell me, then, when you look at the businesses and you take a look at exactly what time, when you're profitable, et cetera, is there a point at which you decide, okay, we will now IPO? And how far away are we from that point, or indeed to an IPO itself?
Sure. So we certainly do not have plans for an IPO at this point. And two points behind that. First of all, we have a very healthy balance sheet, particularly after this financing, number one. Number two, we see just tremendous opportunities to continue growing our regional super app platform. And so for now, we're all heads down, laser focused on executing against our strategy.
This naturally brings me to the obvious question, which is how closely are you watching Lyft as it comes to the market?
Well, we are certainly rooting for both the IPOs for both Lyft and Uber. I think those IPOs will certainly go a long way towards educating the public markets about the sector that we're in. But again, having said that, I think a very distinct difference between our business and the ride-sharing companies globally is our focus around a much broader platform, not just solely ride-sharing or food delivery, but also grocery deliveries, last-mile logistics, mobile payments, a much broader way to monetize and to engage with our customers.
You know, Ming-Ma, there's been greater scrutiny in terms of regulation as well as new challenges to the business model, especially in the U.S. Do you see the same environment happening here in Asia?
So we don't see the same dynamics happening in Southeast Asia. And if you go back to one of our core missions, it is really around how do we enable entrepreneurs to thrive across Southeast Asia. Our goal is to create over 100 million entrepreneurs on our platform, whether they are drivers, whether they are restaurateurs, whether they are SMEs that operate their own businesses. And if you look at the average incomes of our partners, across the region, they generate roughly 30% plus higher incomes than the national averages, and that's key. As we continue to promote and we enable entrepreneurism across the region, I think that's the key to building out our platform.
Ming, a final question from me. I have some more afterwards, but we look at all the different businesses that you have, and there has been criticism that you have too many silos. How do you respond to that?
We don't think of ourselves as a siloed business. And in fact, what we think about our business is the super app platform that provides the most relevant services to our consumers in each of our markets. And in certain markets, that may be ride sharing. In other markets, that may be food delivery. In other markets, it may be mobile payments. So it is all around how do we identify and how do we best understand the customers in each of our markets and provide the most relevant services to those customers.
Just one final question before we let you go. We saw Gojek recently making inroads into Singapore. What do you make of the competition, and is it causing a dent to your business?
First of all, I'll just say that we love competition. We're very fond of saying iron sharpens iron. And I do not believe we would be where we are without having great competition in the past. So we're very battle-tested.
That was Grab President Ming-Ma. Coming up, Huawei's day in court. The company CFO now knows when her extradition battle against the United States and Canada will officially start. We will discuss the very latest next. And Tesla is not off to a hot start in 2019. What is to come? This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology Global Link, where we join Bloomberg Daybreak Australia to bring you the latest in global tech news. I'm Emily Chang in New York with Sherry An and Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. Let's take a look at the global tech stories of the day. Heidi, what are you following?
Emily, Singapore's data agency is proposing that people there be allowed to take their digital data with them when they leave a company. The agency said that data portability would benefit consumers by letting them shop around for the best services and move data, like, say, bank or medical records, to a different company of their choosing. The proposal would be an amendment to the country's 2012 privacy law. Forced technology transfers in China could soon be a thing of the past. Beijing could pass a law to make such practices illegal, as well as make it easier for foreign firms to enter the domestic market, a move that could come as early as next week. This is according to a report in the South China Morning Post. Samsung's foldable phone isn't available in stores until April, but that's not stopping the company from creating more models that fold. Samsung is said to be developing a clamshell-like device, as well as another that folds away from the user. Apple and Xiaomi are also working on foldable phones. Huawei unveiled its version at MWC last month. And those are your top global tech stories that we're watching. Sherry.
Heidi, thank you. May 8th, that's when extradition hearings for Huawei CFO will begin. Meng Wanzhou appeared before the Supreme Court of British Columbia on Wednesday. The U.S. alleges she has perpetrated espionage and bank fraud. This comes the day after it was reported that the Chinese telecom giant intends to sue the U.S. government. Huawei claims the U.S. is out of line by trying to ban its 5G networking gear. Huawei is also suing the Canadian government for allegedly violating Meng Wanzhou's constitutional rights. For the latest, let's go to Huawei's headquarters in Shenzhen, China, where Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie is standing by. Tom, I've even heard that Huawei's headquarters have these paper cups asking for the return of Meng Wanzhou. Really, Huawei launching this global offensive on all fronts.
Sherry, that's absolutely right. I got my hands on one of those precious cups yesterday, and they do exist. I can confirm that. But you're absolutely right. This is a multi-pronged counterattack by Huawei after the pushback, of course, from the US. It's a pushback or a campaign, a counterattack by Huawei on the legal front, and we've outlined some of those cases there, but also on the public relations front as well. And that's why they've invited journalists down to their campus, where I am now in Shenzhen. They've opened up some of their labs. They've taken us on tours. They're trying to portray themselves as an open and transparent company, a company that operates privately, they would argue, and separate from the Chinese government. On the legal side, as you say, we have heard, of course, that they are looking, our sources tell us, that they are looking to sue the US government over what is effectively a ban on carriers there using their equipment. And of course, we have had that case in Canada where Meng Wanzhou has sued the Canadian government for what she claims is a violation of her rights. So this is a legal push, and it's a push on the public relations side as well by Huawei, who are now trying to commit themselves to argue against the US campaign. Of course, the US trying to push its allies to push back and close out and ban some of this equipment from Huawei, saying that they pose a significant security risk.
Tom, how is this whole ordeal being covered in Chinese media?
Well, that's interesting. They are clearly watching this very closely indeed. They are watching the machinations around Meng Wanzhou in Canada. I think it's fair to say that there has been an outpouring of support for Huawei's CFO. Of course, the flip side of that is that you have two Canadians who were jailed in Beijing in black jails or secret jails. They have had no access to lawyers. The lights are on 24/7, and they have had very little access, consular access as well. That is Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And the concerns about those Canadian individuals were articulated outside the courtroom in Canada just a few hours ago. In terms of what's being written in the press here, of course, they have to be very careful about how they portray this. But certainly there is sympathy for Meng Wanzhou, and there is broad public support for Huawei as well as a company, I think it's fair to say.
Tom, how about U.S. allies? I mean, the U.S. government has been trying to argue that Huawei is a security risk. So how has it been perceived by U.S. allies who are being lobbied by U.S. officials?
Well, this is a real conundrum, isn't it? Particularly for countries like Germany, like the Czech Republic, and like Poland, who are wrestling with these issues now. They want to have access to what is cheap and high-performing gear from Huawei. But, of course, they want to maintain those security alliances with the US. And we heard from the likes of Mike Pompeo and, of course, Vice President Mike Pence saying that essentially if you were to incorporate Huawei's technology, then maybe the US wouldn't be able to do business with you, that it could affect communications between the US and some of those countries. So in Europe, certainly this debate is well underway. Countries like the UK, of course, have their own system set up with GCHQ overseeing some of Huawei's code and its hardware. Others may be looking to that as an example, but clearly the US is determined to try to pressure its allies to block Huawei as much as possible. Huawei now on the counteroffensive.
Now, Tom, it's interesting that the date of this extradition hearing is after, potentially, if a deal is reached, a trade deal between the U.S. and China, could be struck. Does that mean China has less leverage in those negotiations?
Well, of course, China has paid close attention to the comments of President Trump, who has suggested, and he's muddied the waters on this, he's suggested that he may or could intervene in the case of Meng Wanzhou if trade talks were going well, if it came up as a demand from the Chinese side. That is something that, of course, has concerned other officials in his own administration. So China is aware of those comments from President Trump. Of course, he went out of his way to ensure that there was a softer set of punishments for ZTE, the other Chinese telecoms equipment maker in that case last year. So they're aware of that as well. I think this is something that potentially China may put on the table as you get closer to any potential deal. And of course, now our reporting suggests that President Trump is keen to sign off on this deal, maybe even in a presidential signing ceremony in Mar-a-Lago by the end of March.
All right. Well, of course, you will be following that, as will we. Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie for us in Shenzhen. Thanks so much. Much more ahead right here on Bloomberg. Stick with us. Dialog Semiconductor reported 2018 earnings that beat estimates, but the good times may not last. The British chipmaker told investors to expect a revenue decline this year because of changes in its relationship with its largest customer, Apple. The iPhone maker signed a $600 million deal to license Dialog's power management technology. It is also acquiring certain assets. Meantime, Tesla hasn't had the hottest start in 2019. Shares are down about 17% year to date. Stores are closing across the country, and the SEC is ramping up its fight to get Musk to pump the brakes on his tweets. Now, Morgan Stanley is saying investors should temper expectations that Tesla will earn profits in China. To break it all down, we are joined by Bloomberg Business Week's Max Chafkin. We've also got Craig Trudell with us here in the studio. And in San Francisco, we've got Ivan Feinseth of Tigris Financial, who's recently done a walkthrough of the Tesla factory. Craig, I want to start with you. Tell us what is happening in China. There have been some Model 3s held up at customs.
Yeah, it's hard to say at this point just how serious to take this, but this is a labeling issue where either labels were missing or there were labels that weren't in Chinese language. But this, it all makes me think back to a couple weeks ago when Dana Hull, our reporter in San Francisco, did this story about how Tesla was in the midst of this sort of mad rush to get as many cars over to China as it possibly could. They were worried about the idea that this trade war could ratchet back up and that tariffs could go up, and they wanted to get as many cars there as they could, and it seems like maybe they skipped some steps along the way or were a little bit sloppy in getting those cars.
So you don't think it's Tesla becoming a victim of the trade war?
I don't think so. I think, well, that sort of maybe remains to be seen, but you mentioned the Morgan Stanley report. I do think it's interesting that everybody has sort of thought, well, you know, China is the biggest auto market and also the biggest EV market. Therefore, once Tesla gets a cheaper car in that market, they're going to do great. And Adam Jonas at Morgan Stanley says, not so fast. It may not be that simple.
It's interesting, Max, given that, you know, you and I were just talking about Musk being this diplomatic liaison between the United States and China, Tesla breaking ground on a factory there, and hope that somehow Musk could smooth over trade tensions.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned this even. There's the sort of other side of the coin, which is that Musk could get caught up in trade tensions, and I think that's what we're seeing. And, you know, the other part of this is just, you know, demand for the Model 3 is so up in the air right now with, you know, Tesla closing the stores, basically people raising questions about how many people are really going to buy these cars, you know, on the internet, and then you throw this China thing into the mix, and it's really, you know, not great for Tesla right now.
Ivan, are you as concerned about this China issue as Morgan Stanley is?
Not so much for the demand for the car. I think demand for the car is going to still be strong. It's an incredible automobile. And when you really look on how far Tesla has come in just a short period of time, because to build an automobile company from scratch takes a lot of work. And he built the manufacturing facility. They put out an incredible car. He built the distribution channels. And the car is incredible. The brand equity is incredible. And I think that there's still a lot of demand, especially for this new Model 3.
Now, you're there visiting the Tesla factory. I'm sorry, I missed you. What did you see that was of significance in the context of Elon Musk seemingly abruptly deciding to close all the stores and go to online only?
Well, I think the choice to close the stores is to reduce costs to be able to deliver the Model 3 that can start at $35,000. There is one other company. Toyota Scion is the other company that does sell their cars over the internet, even though you do go to a Toyota dealership to pick it up. Scions are sold at fixed prices, the same way Teslas are. You order the car over the internet and pick up the car at a Toyota dealership. So it's not without precedent. The only thing I think they may miss out is if you drive the Model 3, it is an impressive car. And you really can't even get to know how impressive the car is unless you drive it. So, an electric car drives a little different than a traditional gas car because when you throttle back on the accelerator, it slows the car down. You don't really have to use the brake as much as you do in a traditional car. So it's a little different, and it's really a lot of fun.
Craig, put into context for us, though, you don't know how the car drives if you can't test drive it.
Yeah, and that's the important thing, where they are going to be closing most of the stores. They are talking about how some of the stores will convert to service centers, and that's going to be a big issue because it's really hard to listen to Musk talk about closing all these stores to cut costs while at the same time putting emphasis on this idea that they're going to improve their service, which has been showing signs of strain as to their credit. They've been delivering more cars. It's harder to get an appointment. The sort of infrastructure to handle repair work is sort of being taxed because this company suddenly has a lot more cars out there than they did before. And so, this whole idea of really doing a 180 on your retail strategy is, I think, what is sort of freaking everybody out here.
Max, there was an investor on Bloomberg earlier, James Anderson, who said Musk needs to step away from the public discourse, the tweets. It's not only that Musk he's so polarizing. There are people who love him and people who don't love him. There are people who love Tesla and don't love Tesla. Why is there no common ground here?
I mean, I think it gets to some of what makes Musk a really good marketer is that he's very good at kind of creating that polarization and painting a picture of the future that is so fantastic that it excites people, and in doing so you end up kind of turning people off. I don't know. It's hard to imagine Musk stepping fully away, even stepping fully away from Twitter, because he's been so effective at selling the car and selling his vision. And without Musk's Twitter feed, what do you have? They're not doing a lot. They don't have commercials. They don't have stores. You kind of need him out there, or it's going to be hard for people to learn about this company. I mean, the one thing is, as Ivan says, people drive this car and they like it, and you could imagine sort of a word of mouth thing where you want to test drive your friend's Model 3. But again, it's hard to see how you're able to sustain the kind of growth that they want to see without spending significantly on advertising or without a lot of crazy tweets from Elon Musk.
Ivan, do you see it? Okay, let's take the tweets out of the equation. Without the tweets, do you see a lot of crazy demand?
Yes, I think the demand for the car is there. The car is a quality car. It's a good value. People really like them. And Tesla has a tremendous first mover advantage in the EV space.
Craig,
so,
would you agree, Craig?
I don't.
Yeah, I think, the idea that Tesla has not done any traditional advertising and has been able to do the volume that they have is impressive. The real test, though, for this company is predominantly the sales in this country have been in California, have been in their backyard, where they do have the greatest presence from a retail perspective, where they have a lot of stores, and people already were sort of inclined to buy these sort of greener vehicles. We saw the Prius catch on about a decade ago in California, and it was really a phenomenon there and not necessarily in the rest of the country. And so it sort of remains to be seen whether this initial demand that we've seen for Tesla that has been impressive for the Model 3, whether they can carry that over through the rest of the country once they get past these sort of first movers or initial people who are excited about Elon and this company.
And quick, Max, do you think the Model Y will impact demand for the Model 3? Will it cannibalize demand for other Tesla cars?
You'd hope not if you're sitting in Elon Musk's shoes. On the other hand, he's very good at getting people excited about these new products. You could imagine a situation where people are about to pull the trigger on a Model 3. They see this amazing launch of the Model Y and say, "Hang on, let me wait." So I wouldn't be surprised if the Model Y launch tries to keep expectations kind of tamped down to some extent, at least compared to previous Tesla launches.
All right. Well, good to see you guys in person. Ivan, sorry to miss you. Bloomberg's Mac Chapkin, Craig Trudell, Tigers Financial CIO Ivan Feinsess. Thank you all. All right, still ahead, Oscar winner Brie Larson taking some heat as online trolls take her down over her Captain Marvel role. Disney was prepared. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon is ending its experiment with electronics-focused pop-up stores. The tech giant plans to shut 87 kiosks located inside shopping malls, Whole Foods locations, and Kohl's stores across the U.S. According to the Wall Street Journal, the closings are expected to be completed by the end of April. It is not clear if any Amazon pop-ups outside the U.S. would be impacted. Well, online trolls have turned their ire on the upcoming Captain Marvel film and its female star, Brie Larson. But Disney was ready for them. One line of attack that she wasn't strong enough to play one of Marvel's most powerful characters. The studio and the Oscar-winning actress responded by posting pictures of her workouts on Instagram. Disney won't say what it's spending to fight the trolls, but digital spend can make up half the funds for a movie campaign. Here to talk about that and much more is a software engineer who is running for U.S. Congress in Massachusetts in 2020, Brianna Wu, and you're not just any software engineer. You are a famous software engineer, and you yourself have been on the receiving end of online trolls in Gamergate. What do you think about this? I mean, I'm sure this doesn't surprise you. I'm sure this doesn't surprise you.
It's kind of a familiar story at this point, right? We were here with Ghostbusters. It seems like any time a woman steps forward and tries to, put her toe in the water for a male-dominated field, we're right back here. It's so frustrating.
Do you think, and the social media platforms have been, they say, working hard. Twitter has made a lot of changes to fight online harassment, but does this go to show they're just not getting it or doing enough?
You know what I'm thinking? Your first story was about Facebook moving to more privacy. And I feel like part of the backlash of women just being exhausted with being targeted online, it makes sense that people would want to move towards more private social profiles. So I think it's hand in hand, and I think it's just exhausting for all of us dealing with
So
this
you
stuff.
think that privacy is a gendered issue?
I do,
essentially.
absolutely, I do. Well, it affects men too, for sure, but yeah.
So do you think that because these, they're trying to get out of control, and Mark Zuckerberg we'll see what a more private Facebook actually looks like. But does this mean we need legislation?
Well, I think that there is certainly a role in Washington for us to address what women face both in the tech industry and what users face on the other side. Something we've seen is really big promises from Facebook, from Twitter, from Reddit, from all these companies that they're going to address this situation. For me, looking at this in 2019, it's very hard for me to point to one thing that's concretely changed for women in the tech industry. So I do think Washington has a role to play.
What does that regulation look like? Well, and I know this is something that you campaigned on.
Absolutely. So I think it starts with letting these companies know that Washington's going to take it seriously. In the video game industry, famously, they held hearings about violence in the 90s. And then the video game industry looked at it and said, oh, if we don't get serious about this, they're going to regulate our field. And then our industry formed the ESRB and self-regulated. And it works amazingly well. What I think will happen is if you have people in Washington sitting on the Science, Space, and Technology Subcommittee looking at this, that threat of real legislation coming down the pipe will cause these companies to finally do the right thing.
Now, you were last on when my book came out in hardcover, and now it is out in paperback, and you're an important character in the book. How much progress do you think there's been for women in technology in the last year?
So when I stood up to Gamergate, I really believed that it was going to be a moment in 2014 and 2015 that really changed the tech industry. I wish I could tell you that happened. Very little fundamentally changed in this field. We're still seeing women software engineers not treated fairly. You yourself just did a story about how venture capital funds, only 2% went to women last year. This isn't because women can't compete in these fields, it's that we're not getting a fair shake. So I think we've got a lot of work to do.
Now, you weaved these issues into your 2018 campaign. You lost, but you're back in the saddle and you're running again.
Yes.
How are these issues and how is technology going to play in your 2020 campaign, and what are you going to do differently?
Well, the big thing that I learned in my 2018 race, and by the way, I got 17,000 votes over that, was that you can't run a political campaign like a startup. I come from the startup world. My very first startup was when I was 19 for $250,000. And I thought that that formula would work, like having a small team of people I shared values with. This time around, we're being more traditional. We're hiring people with decades of experience. We're running a more traditional campaign.
So what do you think what will be your tech platform?
I think it's almost amorphous, but I think people in tech just want someone in Washington that understands their issues, that they can have a conversation about, whether it's from cybersecurity, harassment, trying to launch IPOs, all these different issues. I come from that field, so I understand these things. So I think they're just looking for technological literacy.
So, you know, it's going to be what a year and a half of of fighting. A lot could happen in that time. You know, we're potentially waiting for federal privacy legislation. What do you think what's the single most important issue to you in 30 seconds?
Well, the biggest issue for me is what people in my district are facing, particularly with wealth inequality and not being able to make a living wage. That's the #1 issue. So, you know, we're talking about kitchen table issues, health care, income inequality, being able to send your kids to college, issues like that.
All right. Brianna Wu, software developer, candidate for Congress in 2020. Thank you, Brianna. It's so great to see you here
Thank you for being
again in person. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We are, of course, live streaming on Twitter. Check us out there at Technology. I will be back in San Francisco tomorrow. It's been fun in New York. Thank you so much for watching. This is Bloomberg.